Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. My name is Marijke Geurts and my co-host is Matthias. And today we're going to introduce you to TBLV, which is an online volunteer course. And I should be able to go to the next slide. There we go. So our agenda for today is Matthias will do a brief introduction and talk a little bit about the background. Then we'll look at the course design. And we have a few polls to discuss with you what topics you think should be part of a training like this. And then we'll also tell you what topics we chose and how it's delivered and what the outcomes for volunteers are. And the most important part is how can you build a partnership with New Language Solutions to offer this course yourself? And hopefully at the end, we'll have some time for a Q&A and some discussion. We've got an hour scheduled for this webinar, so hopefully that's enough.
Thanks, Marijke.
Yeah.
So the original project ran as a service delivery improvement project, an SDI project for 1 year, from 2018 to 2019. And it was funded by IRCC. It focused on volunteers in an ESL setting with little or no orientation or training in TESL. Most of them taught a conversation circle. During 2018-2019, the course ran with 2 cohorts, a fall cohort and a winter cohort. We completed the SDI project with a thorough evaluation, which led to suggestions for improvement. If you would like to know more about the first pilot, you can request that report by contacting Marijke, and we'll give you the contact information at the end. New Language Solutions funded TBLV independently in 2020. We updated the course following the feedback on the pilot and ran a second pilot with 1 cohort in the fall of 2020. One important difference between the first and the second pilot was the added unit on remote volunteering. This unit was created in response to what was recommended and in response to a sudden need for more online training, of course, due to the pandemic. Another difference was that we had fewer volunteers who ran a conversation circle and more who did one-on-one training or who supported a link instructor in their classroom. We'll give you more details about that later. It is important to note that the course is designed for people with little experience, even though some who did have experience participated in the second pilot. The rationale behind TBLV is substantiated by quite a bit of research. The research suggests that more informal supports have a bigger impact on formal training. There's something called the 25 to 75 rule of learning by the name of Grevov. That was in 2002. And that suggests that a ratio of 1 to 3 between formal and informal training elements yields the most effective impacts. So meaning that if you complement formal training with at least 3 times as much of informal supports elements, the impact of the formal training is much bigger. The recently released evaluation of language training report from the services branch and evaluation branch of IRCC also calls for more training and support for informal learning to support language progression. That report just came out very recently. The report covers the period of 2015 to 2018, so before the pandemic. But the project findings during the pandemic have also shown that informal training contributes greatly to the impact of formal training, and that training can effectively be facilitated online. Marijke.
So the course design, what we started out with was that it was going to be offered online, and we were hoping to engage volunteers for about 2 hours a week for 7 weeks. So that's a total of about 14 hours. We wanted to cover 1 topic per week, And the main focus of the course to engage with the learners would be through online discussion forums. We were hoping that we could find coaches to support the learners, the volunteers in their learning, to moderate the discussion forums. And with this new project, we're hoping to find local coaches to do that.
Excellent. So let's do a poll, one of two polls that we have prepared today to do, so we can get some feedback from you. And we'd like you to take those few seconds to let us know what topics you think should be covered in an introductory TESL course for volunteers. Thank you, Marijke.
Yes. So that poll is visible, I hope.
I can see it. Yes, thank you.
So you can choose as many as you think are important. Do you guys see the poll? Or you can click your choices? Okay, because I don't see any answers coming in, but you're probably thinking.
Yeah, there's a few items there.
Yeah.
So, but choose as many as you like.
And I think there's a second question available also.
Okay, we got 4 out of 10. Maybe we'll give it a little bit more time, and then we can just talk about the results a little bit and compare them to what we found in a needs assessment survey before the first pilot that informed the development of the course. 9 out of 10.
Perfect.
Okay.
Do you want me to? Oh,
Yeah,
10 out of 10.
10 out of 10. Ooh.
Perfect. So
Love
I'll
those
end the
results.
poll and I'll share the results.
Excellent. All right. So in the needs assessment survey, the results were, the top results were English for daily activities. Some of these we merged because the poll only accommodated 10 items. In the survey we had more. English for daily activities, adjusting speech for lower learner levels, working with mixed levels, helping learners with pronunciation. And here it looks like we have, what's our top here? Is it understanding CLB levels?
Yeah,
or
and then also the
lower
three
literacy
that are,
learners?
Yep.
And literacy. Sorry, Marijke, yes?
The three that are orange seem to have the highest votes. Yeah.
Giving feedback and to help learning. Okay, and the second poll is right there as well. So we've already done the second poll. That's great.
Do you want me to show that as well, or?
I can already see it. Maybe not everybody else. I'm not sure. But let's go to the second poll. So the second poll, that took me a little bit by surprise, but that's great if that's already answered. On the second poll, we had the top results were in work one-on-one, monitor and support was very high, group work without the teacher was very high, so this was in in-person classrooms, and on remote classrooms it was to model language was very high. But let me put it
to share that slide, Matthias? I can click through.
Oh yes,
yeah,
sure. And we would love to hear what your impressions are, and you can put that in the chat. And if you have any comments about the results from the poll or the results that we got from the initial survey, is there anything surprising or anything you'd like to comment on? You can put in the chat, or you can just unmute yourself. Our group is not that big. So.
Matthias, if you want me to go back to another slide, just let me know.
Sure. No, that's great. Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's probably the most interesting one, the one that's compares the in-person classroom with the remote classroom. Is there, what do you think about where's the challenge, especially for teaching remotely, that maybe you found now during the pandemic? Does that affect the kind of things that volunteers can do that you'd feel comfortable delegating to a volunteer? Or do you feel it's the same as in an in-person classroom? Anybody who'd like to jump in?
Hi, Matthias. This is Sharon.
Hi, Sharon.
Warren from Moncton, New Brunswick. How are you all? The biggest challenge I'm finding now with online teaching is the assessment piece, where the students, if I give them a reading assessment or a writing assessment, I'm not 100% sure how much support they've gotten from their devices or from others, in their environment. So sometimes I have students that are a little low in their reading levels, and volunteers to be able to work with these students, to be able to help them so that they can kind of be on par with the other students. And especially with the assessment part, if they can, kind of help those students and maybe even monitor or proctor an assessment with the student, because it's very difficult and challenging to do that online if you're doing it completely online. So, so
that's interesting. Thank you for sharing that. Can you elaborate a little bit on how you did the proctoring? That's always an interesting topic, I think, for everybody.
It definitely is, because if you have like right now, when I do a reading assessment or a writing assessment, I have 10 students in the class, and I mean, if they do a writing assessment, there's a chance that they're going to turn their camera off and go right to town, right? And so if I have a volunteer that can, book an appointment with a volunteer, and the volunteer can say, okay, let's work on this writing. Let's, don't use any devices. Try to do it completely on your own. Let's see what the gaps or what the needs are, and really help that student, support them, because there's a reason why they're consistently defaulting to their devices to do that. And so it's becoming a little bit of a challenge, because now it's kind of like a dependency on them. And so it really affects them being able to speak and write, authentically without the device. So I think that the volunteers could really help in that area by just being there, doing a little bit of that one-on-one, so that they're not kind of spotlighted in the class, with a particular weakness that they might have.
That's great, Sharon. Thank you. Anybody else? It could be it doesn't have to be a challenge. It also could be an opportunity, that's something that volunteers can do online that maybe they couldn't do in person as well. Who knows? But challenges are probably more on the top of your mind. Anybody else would like to share?
Yes, I lost all my volunteers when the COVID began. None of them were comfortable joining me online. So I think a course like this might be really helpful, so that they would feel more confident. And I'd like to use them even in a breakout room, where I could give them half the class, and so more people could participate at the same time.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And that's something that online actually works quite well if the volunteers are well prepared to do it. So that's definitely good.
That's really interesting that you bring that up, because I think that was one of the things in the survey. Here we go. Where we did say, like, what would you be comfortable delegating to a volunteer in an online environment? I think this slide kind of shows that too, right?
Yes. Thanks, Marijke. Anybody else? That's great feedback.
This is Shabana from Center for Newcomers, Calgary. So when I want to have a volunteer, especially for my speaking practices for skill building, or if I'm doing a speaking assessment, because that takes it's one-on-one. So I like to a volunteer to be trained in just don't follow the dialogue. They can create their own dialogues on spot, like just real world talking when they're practicing the dialogues. That's because this is what I like to do in my own class. So if volunteers can attend our class for just to see how we are teaching, so it's easier for them to go with the same style of teaching. That also helps a lot, because sometimes volunteers are, you give them something and it's like they're just going to follow the book and they're not going to go up or down. The questions are, because in real world I want my students to learn that they have to answer. I'm not going to be using the same dialogue for their speaking assessment. So that is the time which our volunteers should be trained enough to know that it's not by the book. They can go up and down with the dialogues, or they can throw some ideas. But so when the student comes for an assessment, they're prepared to deal with any kind of situation they're gonna face in the real world. Because I try to train my students to learn to be ready for the real world, not just a written dialogue, and they're going to be practicing those.
Magdalene also had a question in the chat. She says, topics for volunteers learning vocabulary. Does it mean that the volunteer would learn ways to help students to learn vocabulary? And I think that's the idea, to give the volunteers more tools to be creative. And how can you let those learners practice the new vocabulary, and not just like learning definitions, but all kinds of activities. Yeah. So maybe this is a good time to go to the next slide. And Matthias, is there anything else that you wanted to add here? Or?
No, that's great. Thank you so much. That was great feedback.
As Matthias explained, we did a survey before we started developing the course. And I'm just going to, did you stop sharing the results of the poll, Matthias?
I did.
I forgot about that. No, that's all good. So based on the survey feedback that we got, this is what we kind of decided to include in our course. So first of all, the first week would be an introduction to ESL terminology and the CLB levels. So if volunteers understand the CLB levels, then they can also know what they can expect of their learners. And like the example that one of you gave, like doing little conversations with them, if they understand the level, then they can also understand how far they can take it with the learners. So then in week 2, we focus specifically on working with lower level learners and literacy learners. Week 3 is all about providing feedback on mistakes, giving clear and positive suggestions, and how to improve pronunciation. And so that's likely based on TBLV, giving feedback in a positive, constructive way. And week number 4, we look at using materials from the real world, so using realia, across all levels, not just with the lower level learners. And this is especially useful for volunteers who run a conversation circle or who do one-on-one tutoring. If you don't have textbooks and you have to develop your own resources, that's great to understand how you can use realia. Then in week 5, we look at daily life and employment and how to address those topics that are of direct importance to newcomers. Week 6 talks about Canadian culture and citizenship, but it has this dual approach because it builds cultural competency for volunteers so that they can better handle cultural differences and help newcomers understand Canadian culture. So on the other side, it also helps the volunteers prepare the newcomers for their citizenship test. So we find that this is a very valuable week. And then we added in our second pilot a unit on remote volunteering. As we all know, that's a skill in itself. So how do you do that? But we look at some low-tech and high-tech ways of remote volunteering. So this is a screenshot where you can see all the 7 topics on the sidebar. And to introduction summaries of the units. So the course is offered on Avenue.
Do we all have access to that now at the moment?
No, no, you don't have access to the course, but as we go through the webinar, hopefully you'll get a good idea. And I'll tell you at the more towards the end how you can partner with us and how you can get the course. Okay, so time commitment for the volunteers is about 2 to 2.5 hours per week. And although the course is self-paced, we want everybody to progress at roughly the same pace so that everyone is engaged in conversations about the weekly topic roughly around the same time. So we release a new topic every week, and until it is released, those topics are hidden. We also want to make sure that the website is easy to navigate and that activities are not too technological. So we use a course help section. There's also an introduction video for volunteers that shows them how the course is set up. So that explains the weekly release, and also gives examples of how to complete some of the activities. Of course, we understand that Avenue is most likely a new platform for most of the volunteers, and we know that they still need to learn how to use it. So by giving it a weekly release, volunteers are much like new students that you might have in your Avenue course. They're just starting to use Avenue for the first time. So by releasing a new topic every week, we make sure that it's not too overwhelming. And by the way the course is set up, there's a lot of supports in place, and volunteers become more comfortable using the LMS. However, we have found that the TBLV coach still may need to provide some additional support on occasion. So as an example, this is what the second week about lower level learners looks like. All the topics basically follow the same structure, the same pattern. Each unit contains core readings and a TBLV movie. Those are usually provided in a book. There's also links to external readings, audio podcasts, or videos. And then there's a variety of activities to test understanding and to practice the application of the information from the readings and the movies, such as quizzes or glossaries, questionnaires. The participants' main task, as I've mentioned before, is to participate in a forum discussion. And they need to respond to some questions and show that they really know how to use the information that they were presented with. If you have a group of 10, 15 participants, then they can really get to know each other. They know who's in their class, and this really enriches the conversations on the forum. It also makes it more manageable for a volunteer coach if they only have about 15 people in a group. Then there's extra credit resources in some of the weeks for volunteers who want to deepen their understanding of the material. And we've turned on activity tracking so that readings or assignments that volunteers need to complete are indicated by a checkbox. And that check mark will appear automatically once the activity has been completed. So that really helps the volunteers to stay focused and motivated.
Marijke, Shabana has a question. I hope I pronounced the name correctly.
It's perfectly fine. So
What's the
as
question?
to my understanding, if we, when the volunteers are taking this training, it is not paid. We just have to ask them to just get trained to be a volunteer, or can we ask IRCC to do some amendments in our thing and we can pay something, because it's a every week 2 to 2.5 hours from a volunteer to expect them to do this. What kind of expectations should we have from our volunteers?
Yeah.
And my second question is that, for example, from our institute, for example, for Center for Newcomers, for maybe we decide that I am going to be the volunteer coach. So then I contact with them and I open the course for them and the course will be given to me.
Yeah, so if you hang on to those questions, because those are really good and really important, more towards the end of the presentation, I will address all of that and I'll
Okay.
explain how you can get the
Thank
course
you.
and what it means for you. Yeah, thank you for
Thank you.
asking that. Yeah. Anything else? There, I see a question. Would volunteer receive a certificate after the course? Getting to that. And would you say the minimum CLB level requirement for this course is 5 and up? Honestly, I would say 7 and up, because in one of the pilot programs that we did have some newcomer volunteers participate. And some of the content, I don't want to say it's academic because it's not, but it is quite meaty. And for somebody at a CLB 5 level, this course is too challenging. I would not recommend it. So we did write this course with the idea in mind that it's volunteers who are fluent in English themselves. Okay. So I'm just going to continue with the next little bit. And if there's any more questions, please feel free to post and we'll answer as we go or at the end. Okay, so as we've done the research before we started the training, we've also gotten a lot of feedback, and we try to be responsive to the needs that were identified. So the course is self-paced, but we made it very interactive. We use multimedia to engage volunteers in their learning. We created the TBLV movies, and there's a podcast, and they feature interviews with link instructors and volunteers who share their best practices. The participants receive suggestions that they can then immediately try with their own learners. And we've also developed 2 promotional videos that you can view on the New Language Solutions YouTube channel. And they're Why Volunteer, which is a general video to promote volunteering, and then Why TBLV, which is a video that explains what this course is all about. Right, so on the course itself, we have discussion forums, and volunteers can use the messaging feature to connect with each other and with the coaches. And the coaches really need to be engaged with the volunteers so that they can quickly respond to questions that arise, whether that's about how to do an activity on the course, or if they have a question about the content. Volunteers can share their experiences on the forum with each other. They can also exchange ideas in a glossary activity. So it's a really rich environment for them. Oops. Then in week 7, we added the topic remote volunteering, and there's an option to set up a Zoom meeting so you can give your volunteers some hands-on practice. And we've added a template called In Your Area that can help volunteers connect with local resources for each of the 7 topics. And we give you that template, but you can develop it so that it's specific for your region. Okay, Matthias, back to you.
Thank you, Marijke. Part of the course is also a element at a survey element at the end, which for you is optional. You can turn it on or turn it off, but it's very valuable feedback for us. So during the pilots, for example, we asked how long it takes to complete the course and what people felt the level of preparedness was after completing the course. We found that time to complete had increased with the inclusion of the TBLV movies in each unit and the added unit 7, and it resulted in a recommendation of 2.5 hours per module. So it took a little bit longer. 67% felt prepared and 25% very prepared to be a volunteer after taking the TBLV course. We also ask questions that you see now on the screen. If the TBLV training course helped to, for example, improve a volunteer's understanding of teaching ESL for adult learners increase their motivation to work with newcomers, share information, challenges and suggestions, or just increase their interest in online volunteer teacher and training. There were some key lessons of note that I'd like to share with you here. The second pilot retained a high degree of responsiveness to volunteer needs and their SPOs, evident in curriculum materials and course design. That partnerships with SPOs were essential to TBLV training delivery for recruitment, retention, and for the evaluation. And that partnerships with SPOs were expanded for the second pilot, resulting in an even larger network. The coach and mentor support was rated 4.6 out of 5 on average. And that was because of very good communication with the volunteers, the interactive elements, and the synchronous element that was added, not only the Zoom, but also the forums that were part of it. Quick responses and personal advice from mentors, but also more interactive time with participants on the forum was noted as important. And the practical hands-on activities and resources for volunteers to use right away in their practice were highly valued. The TBL movies I mentioned before with link instructors provided real examples to volunteers.
Okay, so we come to the important bit. Localization and partnerships. So under our current service delivery agreement with IRCC, we're able to roll out the TBLV course on a national level, which is great. However, we are not able to offer TBLV ourselves for all of Canada. If we would try to do that, we could reach maybe 100 volunteers, and that's not nearly enough. So our vision for localization is to forge partnerships with local SPOs and to train coordinators, TBLV coaches that can facilitate the course for that organization of personnel for their volunteers. So here's what we offer. We will train your staff to become local coaches for the volunteers in your organization. We will host the TBLV course and assist with adaptation for local needs. Because the course is unique to your organization, you can choose to offer independent modules, allowing volunteers to complete each module individually, or they can do the entire course the way we have designed it over a longer period of time. If you feel that 7 weeks is too fast, you can give them more time if you want to. This may also allow volunteers to work with students between modules if time commitment is an issue. Each cohort could work through modules with breaks in between if that works for you. Alternatively, each or a bundle of modules could be offered for individual achievements, which accumulates in a non-credit certificate. One of the questions that was submitted on the registration form was if this course could also be used to orient substitute teachers. Now, we assume that supply teachers will have an ESL certificate already, and so this course really is an introduction to ESL, but it could be a nice refresher, or maybe for new teachers who don't have a lot of experience yet, it might be a good introduction to your organization as well. But, you know, it's your course, so you can do with it what you want. Given the limitations and restrictions to in-person instruction, the new unit on remote volunteering could also be provided as a standalone or forefronted so that volunteers can complete that unit instead of the entire course and then go through the rest at their own pace. We will also provide you with promotional materials that you can add your own logo on. So we have brochures, flyers. We have those videos on the YouTube channel that you can share. Then local volunteer coaches can request a certificate for a volunteer who has completed all 7 topics. And then we will issue the certificate for the volunteer. And those can be requested by sending an email to the volunteer coordinator, the TBLV coordinator. We've also created a grad section there's a national graduates course. And once a volunteer has completed those 7 modules, they will be enrolled in this national course. There are additional resources that volunteers can access, and there's a discussion forum for graduates to share challenges or successes, share opportunities, issues, solutions. It can be a community of practice. And this forum is moderated by TBLV coaches from across Canada. So that is what we offer. This is what we're looking for. It's like a job opportunity. What we're looking for is a trained Avenue teacher. So in a TBLV coach, we're looking for somebody who has completed stage 2 of the Learn IT to Teach training, because they will be given their own course to use with the volunteers. And of course, the TBLV coordinator is there to support them, but we expect the TBLV coach to be independent in administering the course. The coach should be committed to about 3 to 5 hours per week to support the local volunteers as they go through the course, to do some admin, to participate in the forum discussions. And as we've seen, as Matthias has shown, we scored this 4.6 out of 5 because there is that interaction with the volunteer coach, which makes such a rich environment. And then at the end, we also ask you to give your volunteers the opportunity to complete a feedback survey, and Matthias can explain why.
Yes, thank you, Marijke. So as I noted before, the feedback survey is optional, but the results are very useful for the TBLV project as we go forward. We would love to get your feedback and the one from your volunteers, of course. The intent of the survey is not to evaluate the volunteer coach, the teacher, or the volunteer, but rather to continuously improve the courseware. It asks about the usefulness of the modules, the learning activities, the interactive elements of the course, and for example, it reviews also how long it took to take the course, all these kind of things. And it also offers volunteers an opportunity to connect with the project in the future. For example, they might be they can opt in for follow-up interviews or stuff like that, and give us really valuable feedback. The feedback survey can be enabled in week 7 of the course, and of course the feedback is collected anonymously and is treated absolutely confidentially.
Yeah. So we hope that you do share that link with the learners. So looking ahead to the future, what's on our wish list? We hope to develop a completely French version of this TBLV training. On the current course, there are some French resources, and we do refer both to link and click, but the core of the program is English, is focused on English as well. And if we get the funding, we would like to develop a version for the workplace, maybe 2 or 3 additional modules to the existing course that have a more focus on employment skills and sector-specific language and how to train learners in that. So that is our hope for the future. And of course, we hope that we have lots of new partners to roll out TBLV. So that is the information that we wanted to share with you. If you have any questions after this webinar, and if we still have 20 minutes, so we can get through a lot, I think, but you can always reach me at the email there. There's the link to our YouTube channel as well.
There's a question. I put the link in the chat.
Thanks.
And there's a question from Diana, who is asking, does the course teach volunteers to use Big Blue Button?
That's a really good question. So in its current form, it does not. We focused mostly on Zoom because Big Blue Button is part of Avenue, and there might be volunteers who or students who don't have an Avenue account. So the volunteer would be looking for something outside of Avenue that they can use with their volunteers, with their students. So if the course is yours and you want your volunteers to be trained in using Big Blue Button, then by all means, in week 7, you can add a Big Blue Button session and practice that with your volunteers for sure.
Great, Marijke. So what are the next steps? How, if I'm interested to become a volunteer, Sharon is asking, what are the next steps?
Then I'm going to be very happy. The idea is that we form partnerships with organizations. However, if you are an individual teacher and you really want to take this training, you're welcome to take it. But we will not be able to set up a volunteer course for you to use with your volunteers until we have that connection with management, let's say, with your program coordinator. So I would invite any link instructor to take this TBLV train the trainer part, which is a training of about 3 hours. So similar to the Learn IT to Teach training, you would take this training to get you ready to become a volunteer coach. But getting your TBLV course needs to go through your manager.
And can a volunteer... Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. So the TBLV training can be taken without involving the coordinator, but what I understand after this, I'm planning to send out an email to my coordinator and letting them know that this is something available out there and I would like to do it, or if you would like anybody else from the institute to do it, connect with you and give your email address to them.
Yes, please. Yeah.
Okay.
And let them watch this webinar.
Yeah, yes.
Vesna is asking, can a volunteer coach work anywhere in Canada?
I would say yes. When we were doing the pilot courses, we were working with 3 volunteer coaches and they were in different areas in different parts of the country. And the volunteers who took the pilot training were also all over Canada. I think it's the idea of having local coaches working with local volunteers is that they will be able to better support the volunteers because maybe they know the students that they're working with, or at least they know the organization a little bit better. But yeah, you could be anywhere in Canada.
Great. And are volunteer coaches responsible for helping any volunteers in that geographic area or only volunteers within their own organization?
So the way we envision it, that would be only volunteers in your organization. So volunteers that take the TBLV training through your organization.
Great. That's so far in the chat. Are there any other questions either in the chat, or you can put them in the chat, or you can just unmute yourself? I'd be interested to know how many of you have volunteers maybe who are already interested, or what the plans of your programs are going into September. If it's back to in-person, if it's some kind of blended, that might be interesting also for us to know, right, Marijke?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I do see a question from Diana that she had asked previously. What recommendations do you have to compensate volunteers for taking the course? Well, a volunteer is a volunteer and they don't get compensated. I think taking the course itself will help volunteers be more motivated and more successful in their volunteer work, working with the newcomers. Yeah, that is the best I can say. We definitely don't have the funds to compensate volunteers. And I know that it's a lot to ask, even for a volunteer coach. Like, that might be a link instructor to say, hey, now you need to dedicate 3 to 5 hours a week to supporting your volunteers. I know that is a lot to ask, but I hope that the course itself is adding enough value that it makes it worth it.
And also the community of practice, I think, that you mentioned before, Marijke, I think is very good value for volunteers to connect with other volunteers.
Yeah. And I'm seeing people saying that they do blended, they do online.
Okay, so there's really a need for that Unit 7, eh?
Which is good.
Yeah. Okay, Samantha's saying could not use volunteers now online classes. Going to someday we hope to have blended learning. Okay, and does that mean, Samantha, you will only use volunteers in the in-person part of your blended learning classes, or will you try to? Is your program envisioning also using volunteers online then in September?
We were not allowed to use volunteers online. We can't use them currently. But when we return to in-person, I was told it'll be kind of one of the last things that will be allowed, volunteers in our classrooms.
Okay.
So I think we explained it at the beginning that the course, the TBLV course, was written with the idea that this was going to be for volunteers who were facilitating conversation circles. And it turned out that there were lots of classroom volunteers as well. So keep that in mind too, that the TBLV course could be for people who do one-on-one tutoring. You know, maybe you have a group of learners in your organization who does not do very well in an online environment, and being able to train volunteers to work one-on-one or to work in small groups. Maybe you have learners who cannot come to class every day and only can meet once or twice a week with somebody. So, you know, the bigger picture is using volunteers, not just in a classroom or in an online environment, but finding different ways that you can use them and help learners. I did see another question.
There's good information about a couple of people said they weren't allowed to use volunteers online. Is anybody, Paul is saying, for example, with a few online options, Paul, is your program using volunteers online? Or will they be using all the volunteers online?
We're currently, everything's online. So any volunteers that work with students are doing it remotely. In the fall, we hope to return to in-person classes. So that would also include in-person volunteering, we hope. So this, of course, depends on how regulations change.
Of course, well, that's good to know. Thank you.
There was a question from Magdalene. She said, would it be possible to have a course equivalent, but with lower minimum CLB requirement? You know, that's a really good suggestion. Right now, we don't have the funds for that. Just like our wish is to create a French version of the course, we could add that to our wish list. And if there is a need, we might develop a lower level volunteer course as well. Matthias, what do you think?
I was just going to ask you, because you can maybe answer that now. If since the course is given to the volunteer coaches, could they change the course, maybe revise it, and for a lower CLB level?
If they wanted to, yeah, absolutely. The course is yours. I hope that you like it the way it is and you feel that it doesn't need too much tweaking, because if you do, that means that we didn't do a good job. But yeah, absolutely. If you feel that you want to add resources or change things, then you can do that for sure. There was another question from Barb. Do volunteers need to have a police check? I would say yes, that depends on your organization, what their requirements are. But as far as I know, yes, volunteers would need a police check. They don't need it to participate in this course, but they need it for your organization.
Do you have any other questions for Marijke or I? We've got a little bit of time left. Feel free to put in the chat or just to ask.
Is there a way for us to look at the course or preview the material for the volunteers, or do we have to take the volunteer coach training?
Yeah, so if you sign up for the volunteer coach training, you will have the full course to look at and to go through
Right.
some of the activities. I also think that looking at the videos that we've posted will also give you an idea of what is covered in the course and how we address certain topics.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry if I'm repeating which has been discussed, because my students were texting me at the same time, so I got a little disoriented.
Multitasking.
So the 3-hour training for the volunteer coach, you said we can do it without being recommended by our institution, and then if you get connected with them, then we can go further from there. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. And how do we sign up for the 3 hours?
You could contact me.
Okay, thank you. So sorry for repeated questions.
No, it's a good question. And if it wasn't clear to you yet, the course is free for you to take. New Language Solutions offers it because we are IRCC funded. So that does mean, however, that your organization also needs to be IRCC funded. So if you are completely provincially funded, we are not able to partner with you, unfortunately.
Barb has another question. Can a volunteer ask any LINK program manager to allow a volunteer to take the course?
Can a volunteer ask any LINK? I'm not sure I understand. Sorry.
Do you want to tell us, Barb? Do you have? Oh, you didn't have a microphone, I think, right?
Barb, do you mean can a volunteer ask to take the volunteer course? If they heard about it from a friend.
Yes, that's
Yes.
yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes, I would say they can ask the LINK coordinator, like, I've heard about this course, I want to take it. If we don't have a partnership with that organization, you know, we may have to find another organization that they can take that course with. Maybe in the future, we will be running cohorts of just random volunteers that are not affiliated with a certain organization. We're thinking, for example, about groups of volunteers who support a refugee family coming into Canada that want to take this training to you know, be able to better support that family, the private sponsorships. So who knows?
Next, Sharon is just verifying. So next steps are to connect our volunteer coordinator with you to form a partnership and then sign me up for to be a volunteer coach.
Actually do it the other way around. You can connect with me and to take the volunteer coach training, but then to get your course to use with the volunteers, that would have to go through your volunteer coordinator or program manager. Magdalene also posted a question, how many coaches are floating around? So we currently have 4 coaches that are enrolled in the training, and we are hosting 2 TBLV courses. There's one in Ontario and there's one in New Brunswick, I think. So we kind of tried this out with a few organizations before we did this webinar, before we started to launch it. But yes, and the training seems to be working the way it should.
Excellent. Any last questions or comments or?
There's one more question from Sue.
Oh, okay.
Is
Yes,
the volunteer
yes.
coach trainer course done on your own when you want, or does it have a start and end date? So that is totally self-paced. You can contact me and I can enroll you in that volunteer trainer course whenever you have time. It's going to take about 3 hours to complete, maybe a little bit longer if you really put in the time and effort.
And Samantha is asking, does the organization need to be a certain size? For example, that is a minimum number of students.
Nope. Nope, not at all. As long as you're IRCC funded, but if you're in a rural area and you only have 2 multi-level classrooms and you're working with loads of volunteers who do one-on-one tutoring, this would be a great opportunity.
With the train the trainer module, like that 3 hours, how much of that is focused on learning how to use Avenue?
Okay, so one of the requirements that we have is that the TBLV coach already has finished or is almost finished the stage 2 of the Learn IT to Teach training, because we cannot support coaches going through the Learn IT to Teach training to learn how to use Avenue. So the time spent in the trainer course is really going through the courseware at a very accelerated pace and understanding how to support the volunteers.
Yep.
Good.
Great, thank you, Sharon. Already sent an email to you, Marijke. Wonderful. I'm gonna stop the recording, but we'll hang around a few more minutes if there's any more questions.
And I just want to say thank you for everyone who joined us this afternoon. It's really nice to see so much interest in the course. And I just hope that we can, that we are what you hope we are.